Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Is everyone all set in the panelist group? Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. This is Mary Beth Gallagher. I'm the Executive Director of Investor Advocates for Social Justice. We represent faith-based institutional investors in their shareholder advocacy, including the Sisters of the Good Shepherd New York, who's the proponent of one of the proposals we're going to be discussing today at Tesla. The purpose of the webinar today is to give a preview of Tesla's upcoming shareholder meeting, which is taking place on Tuesday, September 22nd, 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific. We're going to be discussing 3 of the shareholder proposals that are on the proxy this year. The link to participate and watch the live stream of the webinar is on Tesla's investor page and also in our slide deck. We can make sure anyone has that if they'd like to listen into the shareholder meeting. Just as we get started, first, I'd like to just express our concern and support to those of you who are joining us from the West Coast and struggling with wildfires. Our thoughts are with you. We know this is a difficult time, and we're there with you in solidarity and hoping that you're all staying safe. As well, to colleagues who are struggling with coronavirus, the pandemic is impacting all of us in various ways. So just want to express our sympathy and support to people who are having a difficult time. So today we're fortunate to have 5 guest speakers with us with a wealth of expertise on environmental, social, and governance issues, who are going to speak specifically about the issues that we're going to address at Tesla's shareholder meeting on Tuesday. After their remarks, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. So throughout the whole webinar, feel free to enter a question in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and speak at the end and ask your question directly. A note that we're recording the webinar and we'll send the link around after. So just to begin with and give a brief framing of Tesla as a company, I think we're all aware of this company. It has a splashy brand and a high profile, really disrupting the automotive industry and helping support the transition to a clean energy economy, clean energy transportation. At the same time, the company is riddled with social and governance concerns, some of which we'll hear about today. And as a company really presenting itself with a sustainable business model, as shareholders concerned about long-term sustainable value creation, we want to ensure that the company has good governance and management systems in place to address issues related to human capital management, child labor in the supply chain, racial harassment and discrimination, worker health and safety, and has strong, effective governance. So I'll just introduce briefly our speakers who are going to be joining us. First, we'll start with Jim McRitchie. He's the proponent on proposal number 5 on simple majority voting. He's with corpgov.net. Next, we're pleased to hear from Linnea Brett, who's from the Clean Air Coalition of Western New York. Linnea has been organizing and supporting workers based in Buffalo, New York, who are connected to the Tesla Gigafactory. And she'll speak about the challenges that workers are facing there, which connects to 2 of the shareholder proposals, items 6 and 7. Next, we'll hear from Meredith Benton, principal and founder of Whistle Stop Capital, who is representing NIA Impact Capital, the proponent on the proposal on arbitration. Finally, we'll hear from my colleague, Gina Falata, Senior Program Associate at Investor Advocates for Social Justice, who will speak about the Human Rights Disclosure Proposal. And at the end, we'll hear from Terry Collingsworth. Thank you for joining us, Terry. He's the Executive Director at International Rights Advocates, and he is the lead counsel for plaintiffs in the federal class action lawsuit against Tesla, alleging that it aided and abetted child labor in the cobalt supply chain. So thank you everyone for joining us. Again, feel free to introduce questions throughout, and we'll get started with you, Jim.
Okay, thank you very much, especially Mary Beth and Gina for putting this on. With COVID and the dramatic shift to virtual shareholder meetings, Meetings like this are very important because now shareholders no longer even have a chance to chat with each other at live meetings. So proposal number 5 basically asks for a majority voting standard at Tesla to amend the bylaws. I first introduced a proposal on this subject in 2014. Shareholders are willing to pay more for companies with a simple majority standard. Simple majority provisions are generally used to entrench incumbent directors and management, basically keep those in power in place. Academic research finds that reducing devices like that is associated with higher returns. And of course, it's also better workplaces and a more democratic atmosphere. The board's opposition statement argues that they tried to adopt a majority vote standard last year, but shareholders rejected it. So why go through it again? Well, last year, 99.6% of shares voted for the proposal, while only 0.4% voted against it. The problem was that a little more than 35% of shares went unvoted. In the case of changing the bylaws, you have to get 66.7% of the total shares, not just of the shares voted. So, so it was important to get a higher turnout than they got. Looks like only 65% of the shares were actually voted. So last year, it appears that the proposal failed primarily for 3 reasons. The board didn't really strongly argue in favor of it. They added to confusion by putting another proposal on the ballot to declassify the board, but not into a single tier, but into a double tier. So it's still an entrenching device. And the board really didn't make any solicitation efforts in favor. So this proposal, like the other 2 to be discussed, is advisory. And so if we get a high vote on it, hopefully the board will reintroduce the same proposal next year, and they won't make the same mistakes that they made in 2021. Also consider this proposal in the context of other poor governance provisions at Tesla. Shareholders can only remove directors for cause, which basically means criminal activity. Because the board is divided into 3 classes, shareholders can only hold directors accountable once every 3 years. And then shareholders can't call special meetings or act by written consent. Those are provisions that, more mainstream companies, those are better corporate governance practices than that Tesla is missing. So I'm hoping that shareholders will agree that we shouldn't have democratic free zones run by small, unaccountable oligarchs. And I hope you'll vote for proposal number 5. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jim, for sharing more about your proposal. And something I meant to mention at the outset was that each of the proposals we're talking about today have support of proxy advisory firms ISS and Glass Lewis, which is helpful for demonstrating how they're connected to addressing material risks and supporting long-term shareholder value creation. So next, we're going to turn to Linnea, who's from outside the shareholder advocacy community, but is based in Buffalo, New York, and supporting workers who are organizing there. So Linnea, we'll turn to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. Can folks hear me okay? Great, okay. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. As Mary Beth mentioned, my name is Linnea Brett, and I'm a community organizer with the Clean Air Coalition of Western New York. I have the privilege of working with Tesla employees every single day. Our work together started as a joint organizing drive with the United Steelworkers at Gigafactory 2 a little over 2 years ago. While workers were coming together to fight for job security and higher wages, I also heard regularly about issues with the working environment in the facility, including complaints of racism and sexual harassment. My work shifted focus in January of 2019 when Tesla announced 7% layoffs company-wide and 13.5% of the Buffalo plant was terminated in a single day. In the immediate aftermath of those layoffs, we came together with a large group of workers, some of whom had just lost their jobs without any notice, and we saw some clear patterns. The majority of workers who had been terminated were people of color, many of whom had spent the past several months raising concerns about racism in the plant. They had been talking to management and coworkers about patterns of racism in promotions, work assignments, and discipline, and about a culture of racism in the workplace. In the time since, we've seen workers in the plant continue to experience the harm of racism in many forms, including Black and brown workers with decades of manufacturing experience being repeatedly denied promotions that go to young white workers with no job history or qualifications, and workers of color being insulted and demeaned with coded language like lazy, confrontational, and intimidating. The production floor at Gigafactory 2 is literally segregated by race. Workers describe the white production lines, the Congolese production line, Bangladeshi production line, and so on. I'm going to share some specific examples of the workers' experiences with you all, and just a warning, this includes some upsetting information and some upsetting language. White workers, including leads and supervisors, are overheard using racial epithets and derogatory language. Some examples of comments that have been overheard in the plant include, "We should put all the N-words on the night shift. We don't want them seen during the day. I can't wait to get rid of all these Arabs. I'm so sick of these motherfuckers from the Congo." And "I can't stand these fucking Arabics." Workers report these comments to management and HR, but white workers are not punished and the culture doesn't change. Workers of color at Gigafactory 2 are regularly demeaned, accused of laziness, and punished for infractions they haven't committed. One Black worker who was a team lead was written up after being accused of taking a 30-minute phone call in the middle of his shift. Using his phone was part of his daily job assignment, managing communications between management and the workers he was overseeing. But he had absolutely not taken a 30-minute phone call during his shift. He brought in his cell phone records and proved that the phone call had never taken place, and management suggested that they just drop it and move on. In the weeks that followed, he experienced intense scrutiny, with supervisors literally hiding behind machinery and jumping out to yell, "I caught you," if he was seen holding his phone. In each instance, he was able to immediately show that he was using his phone to read and respond to incoming emails from management regarding the workflow he was overseeing. When he was terminated for excessive cell phone use, the write-up for the 30-minute phone call that had never happened was included as evidence of the problem. Sexual harassment is also rampant. A woman lead describes the experience of walking through the facility as like walking through a jail. This is an everyday experience for women going to work at Tesla. Women workers are regularly harassed by male coworkers, including leads, with comments about their bodies like, "I would totally tap that," and "I wish I could see that ass in a bikini." In one instance, a woman of color was groped by a man on the production floor as he made comments about her race and her body. She immediately reported this and was instructed to go back herself to the man who had done it and inform him that that was a violation of Tesla's employee conduct rules. No other action was taken. On another occasion, a young woman who had been experiencing targeted harassment from her male supervisor unexpectedly started her menstrual cycle 2 hours before her shift ended. She was unprepared for it and had to leave work early as a result. In the 7 months she'd been at Tesla, this was the first and only time she left early. As her supervisor had been harassing her, she was uncomfortable with telling him intimate details about her health. So she approached a female supervisor to explain the situation and ask to leave early. It was approved, and as she prepared to leave, her supervisor menaced her, repeatedly asking why she was leaving and suggesting she shouldn't, and that something was going to happen. She felt threatened by this and approached management, asking if her job was at risk. When she was assured that it wasn't, she reported his behavior and said, "I can't tell if he's saying he's going to fire me or jump me in the parking lot." When she showed up for her next scheduled shift, the supervisor let her off off the production floor through the 1.2 million square foot building into offices she had never seen before for a meeting with upper management to review the attendance policy. She was in a room with him and another man, a senior level plant manager, where she was repeatedly asked why she had left early. She expressed over and over again that she was uncomfortable with the meeting and asked for a woman to be present. She repeatedly told them she was not comfortable telling them the details of why she had left, but that a female supervisor had approved it. As she grew increasingly uneasy and upset, she explained it was medical related and female related. Eventually, she was given occurrence points, which is a disciplinary mark on her record, and the meeting ended. A few days later, her supervisor again removed her from the production floor, took her to his workstation, and threatened to elevate the occurrence points to a write-up. When she told him she was uncomfortable being alone with him, he told her, "It does not matter what you are comfortable with." She filed repeated complaints with HR about his harassment and eventually filed a complaint with an external HR company. No action was taken to address his behavior, and she eventually quit. She told me last month, more than a year after she left Tesla, that she has been so harmed by her experience there, she is still unable to even drive past the plant. The supervisor in question has since been promoted to senior supervisory level at Gigafactory 2. Two of the proposals you're going to hear about today could have direct impact on the conditions these workers are experiencing. Ending mandatory arbitration would be a huge positive step. Mandatory arbitration is an unfair obstacle designed to prevent workers from getting justice when they've been harmed and sheltering abusive employers from consequences. Terminated workers from Gigafactory 2 have been pressured into signing severance agreements that force them to decide between a right to pursue justice from the harm they've faced or severance pay, which is not a small deal. Severance pay is literally the difference between remaining sheltered and fed while they find new work versus risking hunger and eviction. Directly addressing the culture within the workplace and the rampant and severe disregard for human rights could also significantly improve the daily experiences of workers showing up to their job. The ongoing harm to these workers is hard for me to convey. Entering a workplace where you're excited to change the world and to build a career, and being harassed, punished, and made to believe you are disposable has long-lasting and severe consequences for workers and their ability to function in their daily lives and to thrive in future workplaces. Many workers who have quit or been terminated from Gigafactory 2 have found themselves struggling to make ends meet for months or longer. Thank you all so much for having me here today. I'm honored to be able to represent the brave employees at Gigafactory 2 as they demand justice and accountability for the harm they faced. And I ask you to keep their experiences in mind as you cast votes on Tuesday and in your future actions as Tesla shareholders. Thank you so much.
Linnea, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing on behalf of the workers at Gigafactory in Buffalo, their stories. I'm sorry about those stories. It's difficult to know that a company as successful and lucrative as Tesla is putting its employees through those daily experiences. And it's really important for us as investors to understand what the working conditions are really like at the company. So thank you so much for sharing that direct testimony with us. Now we're going to turn to Meredith Benton, who's going to speak about the proposal on arbitration. Meredith.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Benton. I am a consultant. I founded the firm Whistle Stop Capital, and we consult with asset managers, investors, asset owners to help them increase the expression of material, social, and environmental issues within their portfolio. One of our clients, Nia Impact Capital, filed the shareholder resolution that I'll be talking through today. So we filed a resolution, and when I say we, I'll be clear that it's really Nia Impact Capital. Nia Impact Capital filed a shareholder resolution asking that the board of Tesla oversee the preparation of a report. So we're not asking them to stop using arbitration, but we're asking to make sure that the board understands the implications of the decision to use arbitration in terms of what it means for Tesla's workplace and culture. We're asking that the report look at the prevalence of harassment and discrimination in the workplace and what employees' options are to seek redress should they experience harassment and discrimination. We want the board to have active oversight and knowledge on this issue. The reason that we are asking for this are many, and I'll highlight 6 key points. One is that we know that companies benefit from a diverse and inclusive workplace. We have huge amounts of data that show that diversity in a workplace is a material benefit for a company. And there are studies from BCG, Credit Suisse, McKinsey, the Wall Street Journal, Stanford Graduate Business School, and on, that all support this same idea. The more diverse the workplace is, the more that the company benefits, and by correlation, the more that the shareholders benefit as well. Companies' policies that are in opposition to a diverse workplace risk investors' capital. And this is uncompensated risk. This is not the sort of risk where you have the potential for an upside. There's no identified upside with a corporate workplace that is full of harassment and discrimination. Arbitration is associated with employees losing their voice, with the muting of the employee's ability to raise concerns when they arise. Arbitration as a practice is known to have a slight bias towards the company because there's a single individual raising their concerns. They go in front of the arbitrator once, but the arbitrator sees people from that company over and over again, right? So they have a bias towards the company. We also know that arbitration allows a perpetrator to continue to perpetrate, right? And we're not saying that this is happening at Tesla, but what we know is that if a manager is creating harm in the workplace, arbitration masks that practice from investors and from other employees. So they can't tell their colleague what's happened. They can't say, don't go in the room with that person. Right? Arbitration is associated with that. And that creates very significant risk for the company, some of which we've seen through the Me Too movement. Specifically for Tesla, arbitration is exposing this company to an unknown level of risk. Arbitration, again, it's a masking mechanism. And so we don't know what is happening internally. We have very limited insight into the corporate workplace practices. And that means that we're risking a loss of leadership. We're risking a shift of public perception on what's appropriate in the workplace, something we've seen very recently over the last few months. We're risking changes in the legislative environment. There are a number of states that are working very hard to outlaw the use of arbitration as it's associated with harassment and discrimination. California, where Tesla's Fremont factory is based with 10,000 employees, is one of those states that's trying to outlaw the use of arbitration. So we need to be sure that our company's practices are strong and not reliant on arbitration. Right? The other thing that we really need to consider specifically to Tesla, unique to Tesla, is the brand and the brand risk. We have a company where it's a luxury item. It's associated with the environmental movement, right? People who drive Teslas want to be seen in their Teslas, and they want to be perceived as doing something good, something right for the world. To have that association shift towards a company that is lagging around harassment and discrimination, that's lagging around justice issues, has the potential to truly damage the brand. Within Tesla, and we've just heard this from Linnea, there have been multiple allegations, both in Buffalo and in the Fremont facilities, of abuse in some form, of harassment and discrimination. Some of those have been able to come to light, are public, because they were contractors in the facility who didn't sign arbitration agreements. But they may be the tip of the iceberg, right? Because most of the employees who work at Tesla factories are bound by arbitration. They are held back by these agreements from reaching the court of law, from reaching our ears as investors. Right? The concerns around Tesla's workplace are, again, unique to this company in that we're not seeing leadership from the top. Many companies have made active, intentional statements around the importance of diversity and inclusion. In contrast, unfortunately, we have an email sent out by the CEO, by Elon Musk, after allegations of harassment and discrimination were raised, telling employees that they need to be thick-skinned and accept apologies if they are offered, and that if they are members of a less represented group, they don't get to be a jerk themselves, right? So the response was not aligned with what we would consider to be best practice. We've also seen very, very limited reporting from the company around its diversity and inclusion practices. Unlike its peers in the technology space and in the automotive space, the company is not releasing to investors workplace diversity statistics. So we don't have an insight into the composition of its workforce, nor do we have what other technology peers are doing, any statement from the company that employees are released from harassment and from arbitration in the case of harassment and discrimination. There has not been an exclusion placed around this very important and very material topic area. So we would ask that investors support this resolution calling for greater oversight from the board and greater transparency generally from the company. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Meredith, for sharing that and presenting your proposal on behalf of MIA. Now I'm going to turn to my colleague, Gina Falata, Senior Program Associate at Investor Advocates for Social Justice. Gina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary Beth, and to all the speakers and attendees for joining us for this briefing today. As we have just heard from Linnea and Meredith's remarks on widespread workplace harassment and discrimination in Tesla's production facilities, it's clear that a culture of respect for human rights is lacking at Tesla. This management failure to prioritize human rights and workers' rights also manifests in Tesla's supply chain, as we will soon hear from Terry about children in the Democratic Republic of Congo who were maimed or killed while working in dangerous cobalt mines that are linked to Tesla. The Sisters of the Good Shepherd New York Province, an affiliate of Investor Advocates for Social Justice, filed the human rights disclosure proposal at Tesla because investors lack evidence that the company has the proper governance systems and human rights due diligence practices to manage its serious human rights impacts. While Tesla has policies in place that are supposed to protect the rights of workers in its operations and supply chain, including expectations for suppliers and auditing procedures, Tesla's disclosures lack detail on policy implementation and human rights outcomes. Without information about the processes to embed these policy commitments across business functions, procedures to provide meaningful remedy when adverse impacts occur, or the leaders responsible for overseeing human rights risk at Tesla, investors are forced to conclude that existing practices are ineffective in preventing and mitigating adverse human rights impacts. I'll now provide an overview of some of the human rights harms in Tesla's operations and supply chain, which present serious concerns to investors about the effectiveness of Tesla's management systems. Coupled with a clear moral case for improved human rights due diligence at Tesla is a strong financial case, as a failure to prevent and mitigate human rights impacts presents legal, financial, and reputational risks to the company and its investors. Beginning with worker health and safety, Tesla's Fremont, California plant has had a history of high injury rates and OSHA violations that outnumbered the top 10 US auto plants combined between a time period of 2014 to 2018. And while Tesla has reported improvements in injury rates, the company has been accused of underreporting its injuries and mislabeling incidents as less severe than the impacts that actually occurred. So it is difficult for investors to trust Tesla's reporting in this area. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, Tesla failed to protect its workers from exposure. Elon Musk defied local orders in California to open the Fremont plant earlier than was deemed safe. The company also failed to be transparent with its employees and the public about COVID-19 cases among employees, and took punitive action against workers who spoke out to demand stronger protection and more transparency. And Tesla also took a punitive approach to employees who stayed home from work to self-quarantine. All of these measures put employees at risk and demonstrate a culture that prioritizes profit over people. Tesla's culture has also allowed for acts of racism, harassment, and discrimination to become the norm at certain U.S. plants, as voiced by Linnea and Meredith. The company faces multiple lawsuits as a result. Tesla has also violated employees' right to freedom of association through acts of intimidation and retaliation against workers seeking to organize. These are not isolated incidents and signal a broader management failure to set a tone from the top that prioritizes respect for human rights. Tesla's human rights risks in the supply chain are significant and require heightened due diligence to prevent further serious harm to vulnerable workers. Risks of child labor, forced labor, hazardous working conditions, and other human rights abuses are present in supply chains for many raw material inputs in Tesla's vehicles, such as cobalt, mica, rubber, complex minerals, nickel, and other materials. Tesla's impact report is not transparent enough about the company's highest risk commodities and sourcing relationships or actions to remedy these serious abuses in the supply chain. Lastly, Tesla's human rights performance and disclosure are lagging significantly behind its peers in the sector. Investor Advocates for Social Justice did a benchmarking report assessing human rights risks and due diligence in the automotive industry, and Tesla ranked 15th out of 21 companies assessed. Tesla received 0 points in indicators for governance and remedy, revealing poor oversight of human rights risks and a lack of effective grievance mechanisms to remedy adverse impacts as they occur. The report also noted weak policy language that does not include a baseline commitment to respect human rights across the business, and a lack of disclosure on processes to embed respect for human rights. We'll now turn to Terry Collingsworth, Executive Director of International Rights Advocates, who will share about his experience representing the plaintiffs in the case against Tesla for knowingly aiding and abetting child labor in its cobalt supply chain in the DRC.
Thank you very much, Gina, and thanks to Mary Beth and Gina for organizing this and bringing some of these important issues facing Tesla to the shareholders and investors to consider action that needs to be taken. As Gina mentioned, I am the lead counsel in a lawsuit recently filed against Tesla and several other tech companies, including Apple, for using forced child labor in their cobalt supply chain from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I am also here because I am presenting item 7, the human rights proposal that was put forth by the Sisters of Good Shepherd, New York Province, and I thank them for their hard work in organizing and presenting this extremely important issue on human rights. Unfortunately, the issues of human rights, including worker rights, are not limited to my lawsuit and the cobalt supply chain. As Linnea has described and as Gina has also described, there are multiple problems in human rights enforcement that the company is falling way behind on. They're not making progress. If anything, they're going backwards. I want to just briefly summarize what some of those issues are. First, Tesla is experiencing serious labor relations issues and is perceived now as an anti-union company. They are taking actions, retaliating against people who are trying to form a union, one of the most fundamental rights that workers have in a civilized world, and they're not free to associate at Tesla. There appears to be an attitude that it's sort of anti-company and anti the spirit of Tesla to think about joining a union. This is a worker choice issue, and it's a fundamental right. Also, a unique problem that everyone is facing, as Mary Beth pointed out, workers at Tesla factories are being exposed to COVID-19 in unusual numbers and under really unusual circumstances. They're being really forced to work under risky situations, and this has all been well documented. The workers are the backbone of the company, and they should be protected from this terrible virus as much as possible. Third, there are numerous worker health and safety violation issues beyond the COVID-19 that occur in the Tesla facilities. And then, as we heard Linnea talk about in really just depressing detail, Tesla has a problem with racial discrimination, racial harassment, and sexual discrimination and harassment. There appears to be a culture at the company that comes from the top, given the lack of leadership and, if anything, the tacit support of such harassment by the CEO, Elon Musk, and that needs to stop as well. Finally, there are extreme examples that I'm now going to talk about of serious human rights violations in Tesla's various supply chains. This involves minerals, including cobalt. It involves rubber from Brazil. There's a long list of the various components of a Tesla automobile that come from all parts of the world, where often there is no regulation and there is no enforcement of worker rights. I'm going to go into some more detail about the situation because I think it's more than emblematic of a company that's looking the other way when serious violations are occurring. But I want to be clear, what we're asking with item 7 is the board to get involved, to study the problems and issue a report. We want to have more oversight by the board of human rights issues generally. We want to see the board focus on developing a human rights due diligence process that will seek to prevent human rights violations and identify them when they do occur, and then provide a meaningful remedy when adverse human rights impacts affect workers. That's pretty standard. We're simply saying that Tesla, you have the ability to fix these problems. Perhaps the reason you're not fixing them is because there's no one paying attention. There's no process in place to prioritize human rights. And at the end of the day, the company's reputation and its health in going forward, financial health going forward, depends on getting ahead of these kinds of problems and being known as a company that cares. Now, to talk about the cobalt issue, I want to first ask Mary Beth to show a couple of slides. These slides are the children that I represent that were maimed while mining cobalt in Tesla's supply chain. The first photo shows what the typical cobalt artisanal mine looks like. It's a hole in weak rock, and these kids tunnel in there, and then there's no supports, there's no safety equipment, there's not even a helmet. And when those tunnels collapse, as they inevitably do, the child either gets killed or seriously maimed. I represent 14 families. 5 of the families had a child killed in a mine collapse, and the others are children who were seriously maimed, including the next 2 photos. This boy had a mine collapse, was in a mine when it collapsed. His left leg has a bar in it that they don't believe they're going to save the leg, and his right leg has a serious gashes where they had to open it up and sew it back up in horrible conditions to try to repair the bone there. He's never going to walk again, and his hips were crushed. And this boy had his left leg amputated after it was completely crushed in a mine collapse. And I want to stress that this is not unusual. When I showed up in the DRC to start researching this, I was presented with the most shocking thing I've ever seen in my 30+ years doing human rights work, and that is a parade, just a parade of maimed, injured children and their parents, hoping that we might be able to help them and get to the companies that are the ultimate consumers of the cobalt that has caused these injuries, including Tesla. So let's start with what Tesla is doing now. There's no question, again, I went there. I had never been to the DRC before. I had a person on the ground who was familiar with the mining. And within the first day, I witnessed the kids that were mining going in tunnels, as the first photo showed. And then I met lots of people that were injured in these mines. This is not an unusual occurrence, is what I'm stressing. And so what has Tesla done about it? Well, they have a policy. It's called the Supplier Code of Conduct and Human Rights Conflict Minerals Policy. It states that they have zero tolerance for child labor in their suppliers. So it's not that I'm saying to them, you should have a policy that would cover these kids and prevent them from getting maimed and killed. Tesla has a policy. It says there's zero tolerance for child slavery. So what it seems to mean is that they want consumers and shareholders and investors to think they are doing something, but they're not. The fact that we were able to document this in Tesla's supply chain shows that they don't have a zero tolerance policy. They appear to be quite tolerant of a supplier that is responsible for maiming and killing children. Now, even if Tesla could say, and I don't believe they can, because there's reporting that goes back to 2014, 15, 16 that documents exactly these kinds of conditions in the Tesla and other companies' supply chains. But even if we could say Tesla didn't know, that they were surprised by my lawsuit, which was filed in December of 2019. After we sued them and all of the information in the complaint was made aware to the company, instead of looking into it, investigating, trying to get to the bottom of it to see how their zero tolerance policy failed, they doubled down. Elon Musk and Tesla not only continue to use the cobalt coming from the DRC unabated, they bought a stake in Glencore, which is the largest producer of cobalt from the DRC and one of the worst offenders of human rights in the world today. Anyone who looks into the mining situation knows about Glencore. They have a horrible reputation wherever they work. They were founded by Mark Rich, a fugitive, fraudulent shareholder. They are under criminal investigation in the United States and in Great Britain because the person that they put in charge of making their contracts, Dan Gerther, has a corruption record, a bribery record for dealing with the officials of the DRC, and everyone seems to agree that Glencore got its contracts by bribing the officials of the DRC. So that's all public knowledge, and so Tesla not only didn't look into this, but they doubled down and bought the supply chain rights from Glencore to continue their supply of DRC cobalt. Now, one of the things we have to pause and ask is, all right, they know that their zero tolerance policy doesn't work. They're not doing anything to investigate it. But imagine what they could do. This incredible technology company and Elon Musk, who has other interests in space and satellites and so on, imagine what they could find out if I was able to go there in a rented, beat up Jeep driving around and just looking. They could put a satellite on their mines. They could put drones on their mines. They could really see what's going on there if they wanted to. So apparently they do not. And so we had no choice but to bring this lawsuit against them. Now, their lawyers just about 2 weeks ago filed a formal response to our complaint. And the complaint and the responses, for those who want to dig a bit more, are on our website, which is iradvocates.org, iradvocates.org. And the response of their lawyers is remarkable. They do not even pretend to doubt that these children and the photos that are in the complaint, there's more of the types of photos that I've just shown you. They don't claim that this didn't happen or that children aren't being maimed and killed. Hence, they're not concerned at all about the zero tolerance policy that Tesla claims to have. They raise a number of technical legal issues. They cite to the dictionary a lot to try to mingle words that are in the statute that we're relying on. But they don't deny this is happening, and they simply are hoping to get out of this on a legal technicality. Let's say they do. Let's say they get out in a legal technicality. That does not change at all that there is blood cobalt in Tesla's supply chain, that Tesla's zero tolerance policy is a lie, and that they could do something about it tomorrow with all of their wealth, power, and technology if they wanted to. So this is a morally bankrupt position they are taking now. I do not believe that consumers and shareholders and investors would agree that they're not responsible for this child slavery and the death and maiming of children. And I think that investors and certainly consumers, as was mentioned earlier, they're paying a lot of money for these cars. If they feel like they're embarrassed or ashamed because of the horrible things that happened to put this car together, that's going to really change their mind. I think there's going to be a zero tolerance for companies that are doing nothing about maiming and killing children in their supply chain. Thanks for your attention, and I hope we can get item 7 passed, so that will be an important first step in making this company take human rights seriously.
Thank you so much, Terry, for that compelling presentation as well, and to each of you for sharing about your work and the items on the proxy this year at Tesla. The EGM is next Tuesday. So at this point, I want to invite anyone that has a question. You can either raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can ask it directly, or I can read from the chat box. So I'm going to start with the first question that's come in, and it's a question to you, Terry. And in the meantime, anyone can feel free to chat new questions or raise their hand, and we'll turn to you next. So Terry, the question is, has international rights advocates explored the details of the relationship between Gertler, Glencore, and Tesla, especially in light of the fact that Gertler is the subject of global Magnitsky sanctions issued by the Department of Treasury? Should such a relationship be established or defined? It could also be used with Tesla shareholders.
Yes, we've gathered as much information as we can about Dan Gerther, and it's in a lot of that is in the actual complaint. But yeah, this is far from over. The Justice Department is probably not as excited about it as we'd like them to be, but hopefully that can change in the reasonably near future. But the British Foreign Office is definitely looking into this. I have provided some information myself there. This is a serious issue. And then to have the company tied directly to it, to have literally doubled down and associated itself with Glencore is going to be a problem. And I expect that this will result in criminal prosecutions. Now, certainly there's going to be issues as to whether Tesla could be held responsible for what Glencore did before Tesla joined. But once again, there are always two questions. Is there legal responsibility on the part of Tesla? Maybe not. But how does the company feel about being directly now associated with, on a knowing basis, that they came into this after all of this had happened, and then now to be publicly linked to this criminal activity on behalf of really what is a criminal company?
Thank you, Terry. And if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to submit them. We got another question. Do we know if similar problems exist in other Musk companies, including SpaceX, for example? Does anyone feel well positioned to answer that question?
Well, I would just say that to the extent that SpaceX is using the same types of materials, they must have cobalt in their batteries. Every lithium-ion battery on Earth needs cobalt. They probably are using the tin and magnesium that is also mined under terrible conditions. There's no reason to think that they're doing anything different over there, but I have not personally investigated their specific supply chains.
Thanks, Terry. Do any of the panelists have anything you want to respond to or share with each other at this point? No. I guess a final call to see, we have another question coming in, and again, please continue to submit them. Can you lay out exactly the next steps for us to support? Vote Tuesday and then. Great question. Thank you for setting us up for that one. So the immediate action is to vote your proxies. If you're a shareholder in Tesla, please support each of the items we discussed today. Jim's proposal, item 5 on voting, Meredith and Nia Capital's proposal on arbitration, and the proposal from the Sisters Good Shepherd on human rights disclosure. So you would vote in support of those proposals. Other avenues you might take in terms of the proxy are to hold the directors of the company accountable for their efforts. So consider whether the risk committee or compensation committee directors should be supported. I see both Jim and Meredith poised to add to this, so we'll turn to you, Meredith, and then to you, Jim.
Great. Thanks, Mary Beth. I would add that in addition to voting the proxies, it's a relatively tightly held company. So even with broader institutional investor support, the vote may not be a majority vote. That does not mean that we can't expect the company to be responsive to its investors. So there are a couple of things that I would ask others to do. One would be to contact the company directly around your support of these proposals and to state why that support exists and to ask for greater disclosure and transparency around what is being done. The other step to take, I think broadly speaking, is to ensure that the demand for disclosure exists and that it's well heard. Right? So the company's current reporting across all of these topics is limited, far less substantive than its peers, and absolutely represents a lack of transparency that should be concerning. Thanks.
Thanks, and then Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if you're not going to the shareholder meeting, it's a hybrid meeting. They held a lottery for those lucky people that could go down and watch Battery Day and the shareholder meeting. But if you're not there in attendance, you must vote the day before if you're voting electronically. So don't wait until the day of. And also keep in mind when you vote, if you vote for one item, say you vote for, number 5 or one of our proposals, and you leave other items blank, everything that you leave blank is voted in favor of whatever the board recommends. So, those non-votes are not counted as abstentions. So don't make that mistake. Make sure you vote every item. And on my website, I give voting advice on all the items, although maybe I'll change them after today. But I think I'm recommending against the compensation committee. But anyway, thank you.
Does anyone else want to
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I would also add that if you're interested in supporting the ongoing campaign for workers here in Buffalo, New York, my contact information, I believe, will be shared with attendees. Please reach out. We're a super tiny nonprofit, really working to amplify these workers' concerns and call for justice and accountability. And there's lots of ways to support that ongoing work. And I would love to connect one-on-one after today about that.
Thanks, Terry. Is there anything we can do to support the work that you're doing aside from the shareholder vote?
Well, thank you for asking. Yes, again, on our website, iradvocates.org, well, we always are welcoming financial support. We're welcoming information about what's going on, and we will keep you posted. Anyone who is interested in the progress of the case, our responses to the Tesla and Apple and the other companies' answers to the complaint is due on October 26th, and then we should be seeing some progress on the case.
Thanks, Terry. There was another question submitted. Can someone email us talking points of the company or specifically the ballot item numbers and wording? So we'll send the brief slides that I didn't show that tell you the proposals that we discussed today and how you can support them. But ongoing shareholder advocacy should be taking place if you're a Tesla shareholder. Aside from the vote, you can initiate dialogue, send an investor letter. Is there anyone who wanted to speak to that? Would you want to address a little bit how shifting gears is engaging?
Sure. So Tesla isn't the only automotive company that Investor Advocates for Social Justice is engaging on these human rights issues in operations and supply chain. So we've had dialogues, letter writing, shareholder proposals with a host of automakers and tier one suppliers as well. We have the report that we put out specific to human rights due diligence and how the different companies are performing. So I mentioned that Tesla was ranked 15 out of 21. If you go to our website, iasj.org, we have a whole page on the Shifting Gears campaign and a full version and a condensed version of the report available to learn more about how faith-based investors are engaging with this sector more broadly, and to review the peer comparison of how Tesla and plenty of other peers are performing on human rights.
Thanks. And to build on that, I think following the shareholder vote, our engagement will likely continue with the company to consider how the board responded to the vote regardless of the outcome. And in our experience, companies will take action if even closely held companies like Tesla will either adopt a policy or improve their disclosure or partner with someone with human rights expertise to do a human rights impact assessment. So our expectation would be that if the proposal gains support from investors, that the company would take that into account and improve its practices to address some of the serious concerns we've heard about today. I want to invite one last opportunity if anyone has any questions or closing remarks they wanted to make before we wrap up.
I wanted to sort of just to thank you both for coordinating this webinar. The theme for me, Whistle Stop, looking at these resolutions and the conversation we've had today, is around the lack of management accountability and transparency. And you know, beyond each topic area and the depth of information and data that's been shared, there is an overarching concern that in this case we have a company where that oversight, that accountability, that transparency doesn't exist as it should, and it doesn't exist in line with other companies in its industry or peer set.
Thanks, Meredith. I think that's a strong closing observation, and that we all clearly can see the manifestation of that. We need more accountability and oversight, and then finally disclosure showing us how it works. Terry made the point very clearly. It's not just about having a policy in place, but knowing that the policy is implemented effectively to achieve the outcome that it's seeking to achieve. So that's really our expectation. Again, in closing, thank you so much to each of our panelists for participating and sharing your expertise, to all of our attendees for your attention and good questions. And if anyone has any interest in further conversation about engaging with Tesla on any of the issues discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll send you the contact information for everyone and the recording of today's webinar. So thank you again, and I hope everyone stays well.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.